This happened last year, and I'm still processing it. I'm a real estate agent, and part of my job involves showing properties, sometimes several a day. Most viewings are completely routine, boring even. But every once in a while, you get a situation that makes you reconsider your career choices. This particular property was a foreclosure in a neighborhood that had seen better days. The house had been sitting empty for almost 8 months, which is a long time in the market. It wasn't in terrible condition, just dated and in need of some cosmetic updates. The bank was motivated to sell, which meant my commission would be decent if I could find a buyer. I had scheduled a viewing for 6 p.m. on a Tuesday. The client had contacted me through email, said his name was Marcus Webb, and that he was relocating for work and needed to find a place quickly. He seemed professional in his messages, asked all the right questions, so I didn't think twice about meeting him. When I arrived at the property, I noticed his car was already in the driveway. It was a newer model sedan, clean and ordinary. He was standing on the front porch, looking at his phone. When he saw me, he smiled and walked over to shake my hand. Marcus looked to be in his mid-30s, wearing business casual clothes, everything about him completely normal and unremarkable. We made small talk while I unlocked the front door, the usual weather comments and questions about the neighborhood. He seemed genuinely interested in the property. The first 15 minutes of the showing went exactly as expected. I walked him through the main floor, pointing out features and potential. He took photos with his phone, asked about square footage and property taxes, all standard buyer behavior. We were in the kitchen when I started noticing something odd. Every time I turned around, Marcus wasn't where I expected him to be. I'd gesture to the pantry, turn to check his reaction, and he'd be standing in the doorway instead of next to me where he'd been a moment before. Or I'd be explaining the appliances and realize he'd somehow moved to the other side of the room without me noticing. It was subtle enough that I thought I was just being paranoid, but it put me on edge. I decided to speed up the showing and suggested we check out the upstairs bedrooms. He agreed immediately, and we headed up the stairs with me in the lead. The master bedroom was at the end of the hallway. I walked in and started my usual spiel about the space, the closet, the attached bathroom. Marcus followed me in, but instead of looking around like most clients do, he walked straight to the window and stared out at the backyard. I asked if he had any questions. He didn't respond. I asked again, louder, thinking maybe he hadn't heard me. Still nothing. He just stood there, completely still, looking out the window. The silence stretched out, becoming uncomfortable. I could hear myself breathing, hear the old house settling, but Marcus didn't make a sound. I was about to walk over and tap his shoulder when he finally spoke. He said, "There used to be a swing set right there." He pointed to a spot in the overgrown backyard. "Red frame, yellow swings." The family who lived here had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. I didn't know what to say. The information wasn't in any of the property records I'd seen, but it could have been true. Families leave, homes get foreclosed, sad things happen. I made some neutral comment about how the yard had potential. He turned to look at me, and his expression had changed. The pleasant professional demeanor was gone. He looked angry or maybe hurt, I couldn't quite tell. He asked me if I knew why the family had left. I said I didn't, which was true. I only knew the property was a foreclosure. The bank doesn't usually share those details. Marcus started walking toward me, not aggressively, but deliberately. He told me the father had lost his job. The mother had gotten sick. They couldn't make the payments anymore. The bank took everything. He said this while staring directly at me, like I was personally responsible. I backed toward the door, professional instinct kicking in. I said something about needing to show him the other bedrooms, trying to get us moving, get us out of that room. But he didn't follow. He just stood there in the middle of the master bedroom and asked me if I thought it was fair. I said I didn't understand what he meant. He asked again, louder, did I think it was fair that families lose their homes? That people like me profit from other people's suffering? His voice had this edge to it that made my skin crawl. I realized I'd made a terrible mistake coming here alone. I told him I thought we should reschedule, that I had another appointment. It was a lie, but I needed to get out. I turned to leave. I froze in the doorway. He continued, "This was my house, my family's house. I grew up in this room. My sister's room was down the hall. Everything you see, everything you're trying to sell, it used to be mine. My hand was on my phone in my pocket, trying to think of how to dial 911 without him seeing. I asked him why he'd scheduled a viewing if he already knew the house. He laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. He said he wanted to see what you people did with houses after you stole them from families. I started walking backward down the hallway, telling him I was going to leave now. He followed this time, matching my pace exactly, maintaining the same distance between us. We went down the stairs like that, me backing down slowly, him following, neither of us breaking eye contact. When I reached the front door, I grabbed the handle and pulled. It didn't open. I tried again, harder. The door was locked, but I hadn't locked it. I'd left it unlocked like I always did during showings. My keys were in my pocket, but my hands were shaking too badly to get them out. Marcus had reached the bottom of the stairs. He stood there watching me struggle with the door, that same hurt, angry expression on his face. He told me that the lock had always stuck, that you had to lift up while you turned it. He said he'd tried to tell his father to fix it hundreds of times, but there was never money for repairs, never money for anything that mattered. I got my keys out and managed to unlock the door. I practically ran to my car, got inside, and locked all the doors. Marcus had walked out onto the porch. He just stood there, watching me. I drove away without looking back. When I got to my office, I immediately looked up the property records, digging deeper than I had before. The previous owner's last name was Webb, the same as Marcus. The foreclosure documents listed a family of 4. I found old social media profiles, photos of 2 kids standing in front of a red and yellow swing set. I called my broker and explained what happened. She said we needed to report it to the police, which we did. They went to the property but found no signs of anyone being there. No car in the driveway, all doors and windows locked. They checked the name Marcus Webb but couldn't find any current local address or contact information. The email he'd used to contact me was fake, created just for our correspondence. I've driven past that house a few times since then. It's still for sale, but I'm no longer the listing agent. I requested the reassignment, and my broker agreed after hearing the full story. Each time I drive by, I slow down and look at the driveway, half expecting to see that sedan parked there again. The thing that bothers me most isn't even the confrontation itself. It's wondering what would have happened if I'd shown him the other bedrooms like he'd wanted. If I'd stayed longer, if I hadn't insisted on leaving when I did. Was he just trying to scare me, or was he planning something worse? I also think about what he said, about profiting from suffering. He wasn't entirely wrong. Foreclosures are tragic, and people like me do make money from them. I'd never thought about it from the perspective of the families losing their homes. Now I can't stop thinking about it. I changed my policies after that incident. I never do solo showings anymore, especially not for properties with difficult histories. I verify every client's identity before meeting them, use video calls first, check references. Some clients find it excessive, but I don't care. What happened in that house taught me that you can never really know who you're meeting or what their intentions are. The property finally sold 2 months ago. I heard it went to an investor who's planning to flip it. I wonder if Marcus knows. I wonder if he'll show up at the new owner's door one day, asking to see his childhood bedroom one more time. And I wonder what they'll do if he does. I moved into my current house about 18 months ago after my divorce was finalized. It's a small ranch-style home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where people actually know their neighbors and wave when you drive by. After years of apartment living, I was excited to finally have a yard and some privacy. The first week I was there, my next-door neighbor came over to introduce himself. His name was Derek, and he seemed friendly enough. He was probably in his late 40s, well-dressed, and he had this very formal way of speaking that seemed a bit old-fashioned, but not unpleasant. He offered to help me with anything I needed, said he'd lived on the street for over a decade and knew everyone. I thanked him and said I'd keep that in mind. Over the next few weeks, Derek was incredibly helpful. When my lawnmower broke, he immediately offered to lend me his. When I mentioned I was having trouble with a leaky faucet, he came over with his tools and fixed it for free. He even brought over a casserole one night when he saw me coming home late from work, saying he'd made too much food. It was nice, honestly. After the isolation of the divorce, Having someone who seemed to genuinely care about helping out felt good. Had always accused me of being too trusting, and looking back, she might have been right about that. Things started getting weird about 2 months in. I came home one day to find my back door unlocked. I always locked it, always, because it opened onto a wooded area, and I was paranoid about animals getting in. But there it was, wide open, the door swinging slightly in the breeze. I called out, thinking maybe I'd somehow left it unlocked that morning and someone had broken in. But the house was empty. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place. I checked every room, every closet, under the bed. Nothing. I mentioned it to Derek the next time I saw him. He immediately became concerned and offered to install better locks for me. Said the ones that came with the house were probably old and unreliable. I agreed, grateful for the help. He came over that weekend with new deadbolts and spent a few hours installing them on both my front and back doors. He showed me how to use them, made sure I tested them several times. They felt solid, secure. I thanked him profusely and tried to pay him, but he waved me off, said neighbors help neighbors. 2 weeks later, I came home from a weekend trip to visit my sister. I'd only been gone for 2 days. The moment I walked in, I knew something was wrong. The house smelled different, like someone else's cologne or aftershave. It wasn't a bad smell, just not mine, and definitely not something that should have been in my empty house. Then I noticed the dishes in my sink. I had loaded the dishwasher and run it before I left. I specifically remember doing that because I wanted to come home to a clean kitchen. But now there were 2 plates, 2 glasses, and silverware sitting in the sink. They'd been used and rinsed, but not washed. I checked the doors. Both locked, deadbolts engaged, exactly as I'd left them. The windows were all locked too, but someone had clearly been in my house. Someone had eaten a meal here, used my dishes, and then locked everything back up when they left. I called the police. They came out, took a report, but there was no evidence of forced entry. They suggested maybe I'd forgotten about using the dishes before I left, that travel can make people forgetful. I insisted I hadn't, but I could tell they didn't believe me. After they left, I sat in my living room, trying to make sense of it. That's when I noticed the book on my coffee table. It was one I'd been reading before my trip, and I'd left it on the nightstand in my bedroom. Now it was here, and there was a bookmark in it that wasn't mine. Someone had moved my book and apparently continued reading it. I started paying closer attention after that. I set up little traps, things only I would notice if they were disturbed. A hair across the doorframe, a piece of tape on a cabinet, coins arranged in a specific pattern. Every few days, something would be different. The worst discovery came about a month later. I was looking for an old photo album in my basement storage area when I found a duffel bag I didn't recognize. It was tucked behind some boxes, deliberately hidden. Inside were men's clothes, toiletries, even a spare toothbrush. None of it was mine. I immediately thought of Derek. He was the only person who'd been in my house regularly, the only one who had the technical knowledge to get past the locks. But why would he do this? What could he possibly gain from sneaking into my house? I decided to confront him, but when I went to his house, a different man answered the door. He said he'd bought the house 3 months ago. Derek had moved out, left no forwarding address. The new owner had never met him. I went back to my house and called the locksmith who'd originally installed my locks, the one I'd used before Derek's upgrade. I explained the situation and asked him to come out immediately to change everything again. When he arrived and examined Derek's locks, his expression turned grim. He explained that the locks Derek had installed were high quality, but they'd been set up with something called a master key system. Essentially, Derek would have kept a key that could open my locks anytime he wanted, and I'd never know. The locksmith said it was a common thing in apartment buildings where management needs access, but completely inappropriate for a private residence. I had every lock in the house changed that day. I also installed security cameras inside and outside. I checked the basement storage area again, and the duffel bag was gone. Whoever had been staying in my house knew I'd found it and had removed the evidence. It's been 6 months now, and nothing else has happened. The cameras haven't caught anyone, the traps remain undisturbed. But I can't shake the feeling that Derek didn't just want to help out a neighbor. He wanted access to my house, my life, my privacy. And for several months, he had it. I still don't know what he did during all those times he was in my house without my knowledge. I don't know if he was just sitting in my living room, reading my books and eating my food, or if he was doing something worse. I've gone through everything I own multiple times, looking for cameras or recording devices, but I haven't found anything. The thing that keeps me up at night is wondering why. Why did he target me specifically? Was it random, or had he been planning it since before I even moved in? And most disturbing of all, where is he now? Did he move to another neighborhood to find another trusting person to violate? Or is he still somewhere nearby, watching, waiting for me to let my guard down again? This happened about 3 years ago when I was living in my first apartment after college. It was a garden-level studio in an older building, the kind with those small rectangular windows near the ceiling that don't let in much natural light. The rent was cheap, which should have been my first warning sign, but I was 23 and broke, so I took it. I worked a night shifts at a hotel front desk, which meant my schedule was completely backwards from normal people. I'd get home around 7 a.m., sleep until mid-afternoon, then have a few hours to myself before heading back to work. It was isolating, but I didn't mind too much. I'm pretty introverted anyway. One morning, I came home to find a package sitting outside my door. I hadn't ordered anything recently, but the label had my name and apartment number on it, so I brought it inside. The box was heavier than I expected, maybe 10 or 15 pounds, and it was sealed with an excessive amount of packing tape. I was exhausted from my shift, so I just tossed it on my kitchen counter and went straight to bed. When I woke up around 3 p.m., I decided to open it. Inside was a collection of random objects that made absolutely no sense together. There was an old alarm clock, a stuffed teddy bear that looked like it had been through a washing machine, a set of keys I didn't recognize, and strangest of all, a stack of photographs. The photos were of my apartment, my actual apartment, taken from inside. There were pictures of my kitchen from different angles, my bathroom, even my bed, but they weren't taken recently. The furniture was all different, older, and there was clutter that wasn't mine. It looked like someone had lived there before me, which obviously they had. But why would they send me photos of it? I checked the return address on the box. It was local, just a few miles away. No name, just an address. I tried looking it up online, but it was a residential building, and I couldn't find any specific information about who lived there. The whole thing creeped me out, but I convinced myself it was probably just the previous tenant being weird or nostalgic. Maybe they'd sent it by mistake. I threw everything back in the box and shoved it in my closet, trying to forget about it. About a week later, I woke up to use the bathroom around midnight. My apartment was dark except for the streetlight that filtered through those small windows. As I was walking back to bed, I noticed something on my kitchen counter that hadn't been there before. It was the alarm clock from the box, the one I'd put back and hidden in my closet. My heart started racing. I checked my door. It was locked from the inside, deadbolt and everything. All my windows were locked too. There was no way someone could have gotten in. But that clock was sitting there, and it was definitely the same one. It had a crack on the corner that I remembered. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat on my couch with a kitchen knife, watching the door until sunrise. When my landlord's office opened, I called and demanded to know who had keys to my apartment. They assured me that only I had keys, aside from the master key they kept for emergencies, which was locked in their office safe. I asked them about the previous tenant. They hesitated before telling me that the last person to live in my apartment had died there. Natural causes, they said quickly, like that made it better. An elderly woman who'd lived alone for over 20 years. They found her 3 days after she passed. The property management company had cleaned and repainted everything before I moved in. There was no reason I should have known. But now I couldn't stop thinking about those photos, that teddy bear, those keys sitting on the kitchen counter, and pictures taken years ago. I started noticing other things after that. Small items would move when I was sleeping. Not big moves, just slight adjustments. A book turned to face a different direction. A chair pulled out from the table. My toothbrush on the opposite side of the sink. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. Every time I was in that apartment, especially when I was trying to sleep, I felt like someone was standing just out of my line of sight. I'd turn quickly, trying to catch them, but there was never anyone there. I broke my lease 3 months later and lost my security deposit. My landlord thought I was being dramatic, and maybe I was. But I couldn't stay there anymore. Before I left, I put everything from that package back in the box and left it in the apartment. I don't know what happened to it, and I don't want to know. To this day, I still can't explain how that alarm clock got out of my closet. The rational part of my brain says, I must have sleepwalked and moved it myself, but I've never sleepwalked in my life. And even if I had, that doesn't explain the package, the photos, or the feeling that someone who wasn't alive was desperately trying to tell me something. I drive past that building sometimes, and I always look at that little rectangular window near the ground. Sometimes I swear I see movement behind it, even though I know the apartment is currently vacant. It's been vacant for over a year now. Apparently, they can't keep tenants there for more than a few months at a time,